As the flight continues, the tension between Phoenix and Hannah escalates, and it is clear that the calm exterior of the young boy cannot shield him from the hostility brewing beside him. Phoenix tries his best to stay composed, but he can't help feeling the growing discomfort of the woman sitting next to him. He had hoped that maybe, just maybe, things would calm down after his polite apology, but his fears are soon realized as Hannah's rage reaches its peak. The turbulence continues to shake the plane as they ascend, and Phoenix's careful efforts to avoid making a mess are in vain. The drink tumbles over, and a few drops of juice splatter onto Hannah's expensive designer suit. Phoenix, with an instinctive sense of responsibility, immediately grabs his napkin and offers it to her, his eyes wide with genuine concern. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," Phoenix says, his voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. The turbulence made it spill. "Please use my napkin." But instead of accepting his apology with grace, Hannah reacts explosively. Her face contorts with fury as she stares at the small, insignificant drops on her sleeve as though they were some great catastrophe. "This is a $5,000 suit," she screams, her voice echoing through the cabin. The shock of her words causes nearby passengers to pause, their heads turning in disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she continues, her tone dripping with disdain. Phoenix's small hands tremble as he continues to offer the napkin, hoping that her anger will subside. His voice cracks slightly as he repeats his apology. "I'm sorry, ma'am." He wishes with all his heart that the ground would swallow him up, that he could disappear into the seat. But as the words leave his mouth, Hannah's fury only intensifies. "You people don't understand the value of things," she spits out, her voice dripping with prejudice. The words sting, hitting Phoenix deep in his chest, even as he struggles to maintain his composure. He has heard racist comments before, but this time it feels different. It feels personal. Hannah's words hang in the air, creating a sharp, cold atmosphere around them. Phoenix's gaze flickers around the cabin, seeking any kind of support, but no one intervenes. The passengers are all silently watching, uncomfortable, but unwilling to speak up. Phoenix feels utterly isolated, his small body shrinking under the weight of the unjust hostility aimed at him. Meanwhile, in the row behind Phoenix, a silver-haired woman gasps audibly, her hand covering her mouth in shock. A businessman sitting several rows ahead of them turns around and stares, but still no one dares to speak out. Phoenix's hand, still holding the napkin, trembles with a mix of fear and frustration. The very idea that he, a child, could be blamed for something so trivial feels unfair, but the reality of the situation is sinking in. Hannah, now fuming, pulls out her noise-canceling headphones, the most expensive, exclusive model that hasn't even hit the market yet. She places them on her ears as though to create a physical barrier between her and the child she has so determinedly judged. Phoenix watches her, his expression a mix of sadness and confusion. He wants to cry, but he knows better than to give in to her cruelty. The flight attendants continue making their rounds, offering pre-departure beverages. When Tasha, the flight attendant, approaches their row, Phoenix smiles at her, trying to regain his composure. "Would you like some apple juice, young man?" she asks gently, her voice warm and inviting. Phoenix nods politely, still shaken by the encounter with Hannah. "Yes, please, thank you." But before Phoenix can even take a sip, Hannah interrupts, without removing her headphones. "Make sure he doesn't spill it," she orders, her voice laced with contempt. "I'm wearing Armani." Tasha's smile remains, but her eyes harden slightly as she hands Phoenix his juice in a spill-resistant cup that's specially designed for younger passengers. I'm sure he'll be careful, Tasha replies with a pointed comment, sailing right over Hannah's head. She adds, he seems very responsible. Hannah pays no attention to the comment, continuing to scroll through her emails on her phone. She acts as though Phoenix isn't even there, her cold disregard for him becoming more apparent with each passing moment. As the flight progresses, the tension between them continues to simmer. Phoenix, trying his best to ignore the hostility, focuses on his book, taking small sips of juice. His mind races with confusion and hurt, but he knows that his father will be with him soon. That thought gives him strength. Meanwhile, the discomfort is only growing for Hannah. Her irritation with Phoenix becomes more palpable with every passing minute. She repeatedly checks her watch, her posture stiffening with each glance. The flight seems to drag on, but still there's no sign of Marcus. Phoenix glances anxiously toward the entrance, hoping his father will arrive soon. Hannah, in the meantime, has had enough of the situation. She pulls out her phone and calls her friend Melissa. Melissa, you won't believe what's happening, she says, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. I'm stuck sitting next to this child. Can you imagine? First class used to mean something, and now this. Her voice trails off as she gestures vaguely in Phoenix's direction, making sure he hears every word. Phoenix, despite his best efforts, feels the sting of her words again. He wishes he could hide, that he could vanish into thin air. But he stays still, trying not to show how much it hurts. His small body curls up slightly in his seat as he tries to become invisible. The flight attendant, James, approaches their row to remind them that the cabin door will be closing soon. Ma'am, please make sure your phone is switched to airplane mode, he says professionally. But Hannah waves him off dismissively, still wrapped up in her call. I've got to go, Melissa. This is just ridiculous. She mutters into the phone, her voice growing more agitated. Finally, she hangs up and turns to the flight attendant, frustration bubbling over. I cannot believe your airline expects paying customers to babysit, she says, her words laced with disgust. Is there any possibility of a seat change? James, ever the professional, remains calm. I'm afraid we're completely full today, ma'am, he says, but we can assist you with a later flight if you'd prefer. Hannah sighs dramatically, finally sliding into her seat in 3B. She glares at Phoenix, her posture rigid, as she shoves her designer bag into the overhead compartment, nearly hitting another passenger in the process. The space between them becomes an invisible battlefield, and Phoenix feels the full weight of her hostility. For the next few minutes, Phoenix tries to ignore the situation. He quietly reads his book, but the discomfort of having a woman so full of disdain sitting next to him is overwhelming. He remains polite, though, a reflection of the teachings his father instilled in him. Hello, ma'am, I'm Phoenix, he says, with a polite smile, extending his hand toward Hannah. Nice to meet you. But Hannah, still bristling with contempt, ignores the offer. She looks at his hand as though it were something unworthy of acknowledgement. Her eyes narrow, and she mutters under her breath, You don't belong here. The words cut deeper than Phoenix could have imagined, but he doesn't show it. He retracts his hand and turns away, retreating into the pages of his book. The flight continues, and despite the tension, Phoenix remains composed, clinging to his father's teachings about dignity and self-worth. As the flight nears its cruising altitude, the turbulence worsens, and Phoenix's careful efforts to keep his drink stable fail. The juice splashes onto his lap, and a small amount lands on Hannah's sleeve. Phoenix, ever the polite child, immediately apologizes again. I'm sorry, ma'am, he says, his voice small. But Hannah snaps. This is a $5,000 suit, she screams. The entire cabin goes silent at the force of her words. Phoenix's face flushes with embarrassment, but he doesn't cry. Instead, he picks up the napkin and offers it to her, trying his best to fix the situation. Hannah, however, only grows more irate. She mutters something about how people like him shouldn't be in first class, the implication clear. Phoenix's small body trembles, and his hands shake as he tries to wipe up the mess. He looks around, wishing for someone to help, but the cabin remains eerily quiet. Phoenix's apology falls on deaf ears, and as the flight progresses, his discomfort only grows. Yet his father's presence remains the source of his strength. He knows that Marcus will be there soon, and with him, everything will be okay. The story is beginning to unfold, and the consequences of Hannah's actions are about to catch up with her. The conflict is only just beginning. The flight continues, and the tension between Phoenix and Hannah reaches new heights. Phoenix, though young, has always been taught to handle difficult situations with grace, but even his composure is tested by the unrelenting hostility of the woman sitting beside him. As the turbulence shakes the plane, Phoenix's body tenses in response. He remains polite, though his mind is racing with confusion and discomfort. His desire to escape the tension is palpable, but he keeps his focus on his book, hoping that time will pass more quickly. But that hope proves fleeting. The turbulence seems to only worsen, and as Phoenix's drink teeters on the edge of his tray table, a sudden jolt causes the juice to spill. A small amount of it splashes onto Hannah's sleeve. Phoenix immediately grabs a napkin, his instincts kicking in. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he says, his voice steady despite the rising anxiety. He's already apologizing before the last drop hits, but Hannah doesn't respond with any kindness. Instead, her face twists in outrage as she looks at her sleeve, as if Phoenix has committed some unforgivable offense. "This is a $5,000 suit," she bellows, causing the passengers around them to freeze. Phoenix's heart sinks. His small childlike efforts to remedy the situation seem to make things worse. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You're so inconsiderate." Hannah's voice rises, her anger completely disproportionate to the minor mishap. Phoenix, still clutching the napkin, feels his hand tremble. His breath quickens, and he wishes, for the briefest moment, that he could disappear. The tension in the air grows thick as a few passengers glance over in uncomfortable silence. "I didn't mean to," Phoenix whispers, his voice small and apologetic. He's terrified now, his thoughts racing, but he remains calm outwardly. He can feel all eyes on him, and his face flushes with humiliation. But Hannah isn't done. She seems to relish the discomfort she's causing. "You people don't understand the value of things," she hisses, the words dripping with contempt. The hurt that Phoenix feels isn't just in the sting of her words, but in the realization that this stranger has no regard for his dignity. The injustice of it all overwhelms him, but he doesn't let it show. He keeps his gaze fixed downward, trying to avoid further confrontation. "I'm sorry," Phoenix repeats quietly, clutching the napkin even tighter. His voice quivers and his hands tremble, but he doesn't break down. Instead, he looks to the flight attendant, hoping for some intervention. He just wants this to end. Tasha, the flight attendant, approaches their row with a warm smile, trying to ease the tension. "Would you like some apple juice, young man?" she asks, offering Phoenix a friendly gesture. "Yes, please," Phoenix replies softly, trying his best to keep it together. His polite tone contrasts sharply with the venomous behavior of the woman sitting next to him. But Hannah isn't finished with her tirade. "Make sure he doesn't spill it," she snaps without removing her headphones. "I'm wearing Armani," she adds, as if that justifies her behavior. Tasha, remaining professional but not blind to the situation, responds with a pointed comment. "I'm sure he'll be careful," she says, giving Phoenix a supportive look before turning her attention back to Hannah. He seems very responsible. Hannah, of course, doesn't acknowledge Tasha's subtle reprimand. Instead, she continues to ignore Phoenix, scrolling through her phone, clearly frustrated by the inconvenience of having to share space with him. The harshness of her words and attitude toward him don't go unnoticed by the other passengers. The cabin feels heavy with the tension between them, but no one intervenes. Phoenix, despite his discomfort, tries to focus on his book once more, his small hands trembling as he turns the pages. He's trying to block out the hostile presence beside him. The flight proceeds, and time seems to slow down. Phoenix feels every minute tick by as he silently endures Hannah's disdain. He can't help but wonder if this is how he'll always be treated. His worth judged by superficial standards he has no control over. But he steels himself, determined not to let her words define him. Eventually, the plane reaches cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign is turned off. Phoenix, still clinging to his book, looks up for a moment. He's trying to focus on something, anything, to keep the anxiety from building up in his chest. He's used to first-class flights, but this experience feels different. It feels isolating. A few minutes later, the inevitable happens. Phoenix, still trying to concentrate on his reading, inadvertently shifts slightly, and his backpack, which he had placed neatly under his seat, slides forward, bumping into Hannah's space. This minor shift, barely noticeable to anyone else, sends Hannah over the edge. She immediately grabs Phoenix's book and backpack, shoving them roughly back toward him. "Keep your things on your side," she snaps, her voice loud enough for several rows to hear. The words sting as they hit Phoenix, and his heart sinks in his chest. The sudden aggression catches him off guard, and his hands tremble as he tries to retrieve his book from the floor. His voice cracks as he quietly apologizes again. "I'm sorry." But it's not enough. Hannah leans in close, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper, meant only for Phoenix's ears. "I bet your parents didn't teach you any manners," she sneers. The hurt in her words is palpable, and Phoenix's hand shakes as he picks up his book, the pages now slightly bent from the fall. He doesn't cry. Instead, he raises the book to his chest, a futile attempt to protect himself from the verbal assault. Several nearby passengers exchange uncomfortable glances. A woman across the aisle gasps, her hand flying to her mo. A businessman in the row ahead turns around and stares, but still no one speaks up. Phoenix, feeling the weight of the entire situation, turns his gaze out the window, trying to distract himself. He's done nothing wrong, yet he feels like he's the one who's being punished. The unfairness of it all eats at him, but he refuses to let it show. His father had always taught him that the actions of others don't define who he is. But right now, that lesson seems to be a distant echo, lost in the chaos of this moment. As the flight progresses, Hannah continues to make snide comments under her breath, making sure Phoenix hears every word. She talks about how first class used to mean something, and how the standards have really fallen. Phoenix tries to ignore her, but it's difficult when every glance from her feels like a condemnation. Eventually, the plane hits another patch of turbulence. Phoenix's drink, already precariously perched on his tray, tips over again. This time, despite his best efforts, it spills onto Hannah's designer suit. Without hesitation, Phoenix reaches for his napkin. His heart races in his chest, but he tries to remain composed. "I'm sorry," he says again, his voice barely above a whisper. It was the turbulence. Hannah, however, explodes. "This is ridiculous," she screams, her face turning bright red with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she adds, her voice shaking with fury. Phoenix's hands tremble as he desperately tries to wipe up the mess, but it's no use. Hannah's anger is now fully unleashed. She doesn't care about his apology. She's too wrapped up in her own sense of entitlement. I've paid for first class. I didn't expect to be stuck next to a child, she rants. You people don't understand the value of things. Her words are venomous, and they sting more than the spill ever could. Phoenix's heart aches. He's just a child, trying to do the right thing, and yet, here he is, being vilified for something that was beyond his control. The pain of her words sinks in, but he doesn't cry. He's learned that in moments like this, it's better to stay silent. Meanwhile, a few other passengers are beginning to notice the scene unfolding before them. A woman in the row behind them gasps audibly, and a businessman sitting a few rows ahead turns to look at what's happening, but still no one intervenes. As the flight continues, Hannah's fury only grows. The tension in the cabin is palpable, and Phoenix can't help but feel like he's being suffocated by her presence. He doesn't understand why she hates him so much. What did he ever do to deserve this? His thoughts swirl in a storm of confusion and hurt. But then, just as things seem to reach their breaking point, an unexpected intervention occurs. The door to the airplane opens and Marcus Reynolds, Phoenix's father, steps onto the plane. He's just finished handling a business call and is walking toward the first-class cabin, unaware of the tension that's been building between Phoenix and Hannah. But as he walks down the aisle and sees Phoenix sitting rigidly in his seat, his brow furrows in concern. Phoenix's body language gives away the unease that's been building inside him. Marcus's gaze flickers to the seat next to Phoenix, and he sees Hannah, the woman who's been tormenting his son, sitting there. His expression darkens immediately, and the moment he sits down next to Phoenix, he knows something is wrong. Without speaking a word to Phoenix, Marcus focuses on Hannah, his voice low but filled with authority. "How dare you strike my son?" he asks quietly. The words are soft, yet they carry a weight that immediately shifts the atmosphere in the cabin. Hannah freezes and the color drains from her face as she turns to see the man standing beside her. Recognition dawns, and she realizes that the man sitting next to her isn't just anyone. It's Marcus Reynolds, the billionaire businessman and the father of the very child she had just slapped. Hannah's heart skips a beat as the gravity of her actions sinks in. She stammers, I didn't know. I didn't realize he was your son." Marcus's gaze never wavers as he responds, his voice cold and controlled. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, do you?